بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله الأمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to a new program of Umdatul Ahkaam. And if you recall, last time we finished hadith number 71, and today inshallah we will be studying hadith number 72. This hadith was narrated by Imam As-Sahabi, the great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, Anas ibn Malik, may Allah be pleased with him. He said that my grandmother, Mulaika, may Allah be pleased with her, invited the Prophet ﷺ for a meal which she has prepared herself. The Prophet answered the invitation. He ate from the meal, and afterwards he said, "Get up, let me lead you in prayer." Of course, we know that this is a great honor. And Anas says that I took my hasir, which is a mat, and I washed it because it was darkened because of the prolonged time it was used. And the Prophet of Allah stood on it. The orphan and I aligned behind him, and the old lady, my grandmother Mulaika, stood behind us. The Prophet of Allah led us in prayer and offered 2 rak'ahs and then left. This is the version of Al-Bukhari. In the version of Imam Muslim, a different story, but the same situation. Anas also narrated that the Prophet prayed with him and his mother, Sulaim, and he made Anas stand to his right, and the woman, that is his mother, behind them. From this hadith, we learn a number of lessons. Among them is, before we go into the position of those praying behind the Imam, who should be in front of who, we learn from this hadith how humble the Prophet was, alayhi salatu wasalam. It was reported in the Sahih hadith that a young girl with a problem would come to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam to complain about her problem, holds his hand, and she leads him in the streets of Medina talking to him about her problem. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam does not pull his hand because he wants to listen to her problem. How humble that is. We all know that in the hadith where a man was summoned in front of the Prophet ﷺ, he was brought in front of him trembling and shaking out of fear. And the Prophet ﷺ calmed him down by saying, "Take it easy, my friend. I am only the son of a woman who used to eat dry meat in Mecca. I'm just a normal man. My mother was not a queen. She used to eat dry meat." And because the Prophet ﷺ was the mercy of Allah. And not only that, to the extent that one of the companions was in his house, the Prophet came and he requested to enter. What does a person who requests to enter say? "Assalamu alaikum, a'adkhul." The Prophet said this, "Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah." A'adkhul once, twice, and thrice. And every time he used to say this, the companion from inside the house would say in a very low voice, "Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh." And in the third time, the Prophet left, as the sunnah is. You ask for 3 times for permission and then you leave. As he was leaving, the companion came out and said, "Come in, O Prophet of Allah." And the Prophet of Allah said, "Why didn't you allow me in the first time?" And the man said, "O Prophet of Allah, you were saying, may peace and mercy of Allah be upon you. Shall I enter? This is dua. You're making dua. You want me to cut this from the first time? No, I want you to say it 3 times. So the Prophet did what any companions would have wished for. And that is, he said, "Let me pray, let me lead you in prayer." So Anas, what he did was, he went into a mat. Hasir is a mat usually made of straw, of small pieces of straw put together, and attached in a certain manner. Sometimes people use it as a blanket. Sometimes they sit on it. Sometimes they serve food on it. The companions were not rich. They didn't have like 10 or 20 of those. Nowadays, when we eat on the floor, we bring sort of disposable mats that we eat on, and then we throw them in the garbage, not knowing that this pollutes the environment because it's made of plastic, and this is not recyclable by nature. So it's going to pollute the environment, and we're spending money just because it is convenient not to wash it, to spend 2 more minutes cleaning it. So just throw it, and that is it. At the time of the companions, no. They didn't have money. So maybe the only thing that they had in the house was this mat. And it was darkened. It became black. Because imagine if you use it for multi-purpose, this would eventually happen to it. So he washed it. And even if you wash it, if you put it in a washing machine, it's not going to be as clean as it used to be. But they tried. The Prophet prayed on it, alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is another sign of his humbleness. If someone offers you such a mat to sit on, would you sit on it? No, it's going to make my clothes dirty. I don't know what you did on it. I don't know what you ate on it. Not the Prophet ﷺ. It's washed, there is water on it, khalas, it's clean. And he led them in prayer in 2 rak'ahs. Now, the significance of this hadith is to show us where people stand. And from this hadith, we understand that if there are more than one praying behind the Imam, they should make a row. So the Prophet was the Imam, the leader. Behind him was an orphan, someone of the companions, a young orphan. And what is the definition of orphan? An orphan is a person who his father has died before reaching the age of puberty. If the child reaches the age of puberty, he's not an orphan anymore. So if someone comes to me and says, Sheikh, where is your father? I said, Allah, I'm an orphan. No, this is not true. And if you want to support me and provide for me so that you would be sponsoring an orphan, no, this is not applicable because I've reached, I believe, the age of puberty long time ago. So this is the definition of orphan, because so many times people say, I've been sponsoring an orphan, mashallah. How old is he? He's in college. No, this is not, he's not an orphan anymore. Maybe he's needy. But when the Prophet says, me and those who sponsor an orphan are like this on the Day of Judgment in Jannah. So this is only for those who did not reach the age of puberty. Once the child reaches the age of puberty, he is not an orphan anymore. So, going back to the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ stood at the beginning, an orphan and Anas stood behind him, and the grandmother stood at the back. And this is the sunnah. And this is what is mandatory. So, we learn that a woman's place is always behind men. And in a similar hadith, when the Prophet led the prayer with Anas did not stand behind him. Why? Because he was alone. So he stood next to the Prophet to his right. Yet Sulaim, may Allah be pleased with her, stood at the back. Meaning that a woman's position is always behind men. And to us this is normal. To us this is logical. To the non-Muslims, especially to the women, they might find this inferior. They might find this not worthy of them because there is no equality. But any logical person would know that this is the best thing to do. What is the essence of prayer? Khushu', submissiveness. So if you have a woman in front of you praying, if she makes ruku' or sujood, if she bows or prostrates, are you going to face the qibla? It's a different qibla. And this is not good for your prayer. If she's standing next to you, then definitely you would narrow the gaps and straighten your line and touch the shoulder to the shoulder and to the ankle. And if anything more I can do, that would be significant. But Islam came to protect both men and women. And that is why Islam segregated between them. Even if she was your wife. If I'm praying with my wife in my home, can she stand next to me? No, not at all. She has to stand behind me. This is the Sunnah, and this is from the one who created men and women. This is from the one who knows what's best for men and what's best for women. And it's not man-made. And that is why it's a divine religion. We have a short break. Stay tuned. And inshallah, we'll be right back. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back. The hadith of Anas ibn Malik also teaches us that it is permissible to offer voluntary prayer in congregation, but not to have this as the norm. Meaning, if some of my students, for example, come to me in the middle of the night saying that we would like to pray with you night prayer, is it permissible? Yes, if I'm going to do this once or twice a month, so that we would prolong our prayers, or they would learn from me how to pray, or to have a dars or a lesson together, this is okay. The Prophet prayed with Anas ibn Malik, voluntary prayers. He prayed night prayer with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, with Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, with Abdullah ibn Abbas, with all of his wives. So he used to pray night prayer in congregation, but it was not the norm. Not every single night we make it like Taraweeh. This becomes a bid'ah. This becomes an innovation. Therefore, if you go to someone's house and you want to pray congregation prayer, voluntary prayer, this is permissible, but don't make it as a habit, first of all. Second of all, be careful that they are not requesting you to pray for them because they think that you are barakah. If this is the case, this is forbidden. Why? Because you do not seek the barakah except from the owner of the barakah, and that is Allah Azza wa Jal. We know that barakah exists. Barakah can be in time. Barakah can be in location. Barakah can be in substances. Barakah can be in Quran. Barakah in time. We know that Laylatul Qadr, the night of decree, is more blessed than any other night. Isn't that so? We know that the 10 days of the Hijjah are the best days of the whole year. We know that Jumu'ah, Friday, is more blessed than the other days of the week. So we know that there are certain blessed times. The 4 sacred months of the year. The 3 months of Al-Hajj. All of these are sacred times that Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed. We know that there are locations that are blessed more than others, such as Mecca, Medina, Arafah, Bayt al-Maqdis, Masjid al-Aqsa. We know that one prayer in it is equivalent to 500. So it is blessed. In Medina, 1,000. In Mecca, 100,000 elsewhere. So these locations are blessed. We know that there are surahs of the Quran blessed more than the others. Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran. They are blessed. They are Al-Zahrawan, Al-Ghayayatan, as described by the Prophet ﷺ. We know that even in eating, there are certain positions. If you do it, you get the blessing of Allah. For example, the companions used to complain to the Prophet ﷺ that they're unable to have sufficient food. It always runs out. The Prophet says, eat from the same plate and do not eat alone. You know, open buffets are like this. When you put your food and go and eat alone like a monkey. No, the Prophet says, eat from the same plate. All of you eat from the same plate. And do not eat from the middle of it, because the barakah falls on the middle. So the Prophet says the barakah falls on the middle. So you have to eat from the sides until the middle goes, and then you eat it and you consume it. And not only that, if you finish your plate, the Prophet says, clean it and lick it, because you do not know where the barakah is. Not only that, even your fingers, the one you ate with. Also, you have to lick it because you don't know where the barakah. And all of these things Muslims do not because of culture, because of their seeking the barakah. Now, if someone says, okay, Sheikh, I'd like to drink water after you from the same glass because I'd like to get some barakah of your knowledge or barakah of your religion, I tell you, you will be possessed by the worst types of jinn because I have no barakah. And no living being after the Prophet ﷺ has barakah, not even the companions. The barakah is only in the Prophet ﷺ, in what he used, in what he wore, in what he ate, in anything that came in contact with him. Other than that, do not seek the barakah except from the Prophet ﷺ. If you have questions, we will take your questions inshallah just before the end of the session. Let us finish this hadith inshallah. So in the hadith also, we find that answering the invitation can be mandatory and can be recommended. Scholars say that it is part of the rights of a Muslim over a Muslim, that when he invites him, he accepts and answers the invitation. But when? Scholars say when the invitation is mandatory, such as when he's inviting you for the meal of the wedding, or he's inviting you for aqiqah, if he was blessed with a child. These are considered to be wajib invitations. You have to go. Other than that, it's recommended and voluntary. If he's making a gathering for his friends and he's cooking a meal and he invites you, this is not mandatory. It is recommended that you answer because he would feel good about it. However, in the mandatory and in the voluntary, if there is something haram, you must not attend. Examples. If I'm invited to a wedding, but the wedding is mixed, women and men, I cannot go. This is un-Islamic. One says, Sheikh, all of our weddings are like this. I say, well, revise your Islam, because you are not on the correct Islam. It is forbidden for men and women to mix in weddings, in gatherings, in family gatherings. My paternal aunt is coming, and her husband and her children and her daughters, and they're visiting us. And my mother says I have to eat with them and talk with them and maybe take the girls out to see the city. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. And she says that this is part of Islam because Islam tells us to be hospitable to our guests. Yes, but it doesn't tell you to take them to the disco or go to a nightclub. It tells you to follow the Sharia. And mixing with the opposite sex who is not a mahram for you, this is completely forbidden. You're invited to a wedding that is segregated, alhamdulillah, men only. But once you went in, you found a live band playing music. This is haram. It is not permissible for you to attend such a wedding. Go and tell them this is haram, I'm leaving, assalamu alaikum. Or even better more, you call the bride and tell him that this is not permissible in our religion. So answering the invitations is a good thing for us to do because this gets us closer and to each other, and we're following the sunnah, providing we do not do any forbidden things. We open the floor for questions. Raise your voice, please.
It has become customary in Bombay, when two people meet, they ask for a blessing, pray for me. While going for Hajj also, they say that pray for me. Can you?
Okay, if I understand your question correctly, if you're asking about when I meet people in Mumbai or anywhere and we depart, they say pray for me or don't forget us from your dua. And likewise, if someone is going for Hajj, we tell him please don't forget us from your dua. Is this your question? This is not asking for a blessing. Blessing is different. Blessing is when I come in, or the Imam of Haram, for example, as I've seen that in UK, in England, the sophisticated people, I've seen them attacking Sheikh Abdurrahman Sidis and tearing his garments. Why? And they're happy. They say, we got this barakah from Sheikh. What is this? They're going to wash it. They're going to put it in their living room. I don't know. But they think that any traces of his is a barakah. This is haram. This is shirk. Other than the Prophet ﷺ. But when you go to someone and ask him to make dua, it's an issue of dispute, whether it's permissible or not, but no one says it's shirk. Some say that it is not recommended because you're not depending on Allah. What's the difference between you and me when it comes to dua? Oh, Shaykh, your dua is more acceptable. How do you know? You don't know. Maybe it's less. Allah mentioned in Surah An-Naml, أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ وَيَجْعَلُكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ الْأَرْضِ. Who is it that answers the one in distress? More. Allah Azza wa Jal. So the one who is in stress is closer to Allah to answer his call than any one of us, right? So if you have a calamity, if you have a problem, and you see someone going for Hajj, if you tell him, make dua for me, I'll tell you, your dua is more acceptable than his, because you're the one in need. And a lot of the Muslims don't know this. So is it halal or haram? I believe that it is halal. It is permissible to ask someone to make dua for you. But always, as stated before, change your intention. In the sense, I'm not asking him to make dua because he's closer to Allah. I'm asking him to make dua because I know that Allah has appointed an angel. Whenever he makes dua for me, the angel says, and to you, similar to it. So I'm benefiting him when he's making dua for me. If I have this intention, inshallah, there's no problem at all.
Sheikh, as you said regarding the invitation that it is mandatory if it is for a walima or for aqiqah, but due to some priorities, some other priorities, if we cannot go, because as you said, it's mandatory, so if we don't go, we would be sinning. So how do we, adjust that? If
you have an emergency that allows you to skip, yes, if someone is sick, and he says, "Ya akhi, I have to crawl on my knees and hands to reach the invitation because it's wajib." No. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah Azza wa Jal does not oblige a soul except up to its capability. And not only that, if you ask the host, so for example, if your mother is coming and you are receiving her from the airport at the same time of the dinner, so you definitely ask the host and tell him, "I'd like to be excused because this and that," and definitely the host would tell you, "Akhi, you're excused, go ahead." Even if you don't feel like going, if you ask permission from the host and tell him that, "I have, some work to do, I'm tired, I don't feel like coming, next time I'll make it up for you," and he says it's okay, then there is no sin at all. I'm afraid that this is all the time we have. Until we meet next time, fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.